Buried beneath scorching sands lies a story older than legend. Picture a land where the desert meets the river, where golden pyramids pierce the sky, and where pharaohs ruled as living gods for over 3,000 years. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization so magnificent that its monuments still inspire awe today, and its mysteries continue to captivate our imagination. Ancient Egypt wasn't just a kingdom, it was the world's first great nation-state, a beacon of learning, art, and power that dominated the ancient world longer than any empire before or since. From approximately 3,100 BCE to 30 BCE, Egypt's story spans over 3 millennia, longer than the entire history of Christianity, Islam, and the Roman Empire combined. The Greek historian Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and truer words were never spoken. Without the great river that flows northward through the Sahara Desert, there would be no Egypt as we know it. Every summer, the Nile would flood its banks, depositing rich black silt across the floodplains. This annual miracle transformed a narrow strip of desert into the most fertile agricultural land in the ancient world. The Egyptians called their country Kemet, meaning black land, referring to this life-giving soil that stood in stark contrast to the red desert, or Deshret, that surrounded them. But Egypt was more than just geography and agriculture. It was a civilization that gave the world paper, ink, the calendar, advanced medicine, and architectural wonders that still defy explanation. It was a land where art reached sublime heights, where literature flourished, and where the first peace treaty in recorded history was signed. Most fascinatingly, it was a culture so obsessed with the afterlife that they spent centuries perfecting the art of mummification and built monuments designed to last for eternity. Much of what we know about ancient Egypt lay hidden for centuries, buried beneath sand and myth, until the modern world quite literally stumbled upon it. In 1799, during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, French soldiers uncovered a curious black slab near the town of Rosetta. This stone, inscribed in 3 scripts, would become the key to unlocking the secrets of hieroglyphs and, with them, the entire ancient civilization. Since that moment, archaeologists, historians, and adventurers have unearthed temples, tombs, and scrolls that breathe life into a world once lost to time. And with these discoveries, we can now return to the very beginning. Our story begins in the mists of prehistory, around 3,100 BCE, when a legendary king named Narmer, also known as Menes, accomplished something unprecedented in human history. He united the 2 lands of Upper and Lower Egypt under one crown, creating the world's first unified nation-state. This wasn't merely a political achievement, it was a conceptual revolution that would influence how humans organize themselves for millennia to come. Before Narmer, Egypt was divided into dozens of independent territories. The fertile Nile Delta in the north and the narrow river valley in the south had developed distinct cultures, different deities, and separate political systems. The unification wasn't achieved through diplomacy alone. Archaeological evidence suggests a series of brutal conquests, with Narmer's forces systematically defeating rival kingdoms and incorporating their territories into a single realm. The famous Narmer palette, discovered in 1898, depicts this momentous unification. On one side, we see the king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, preparing to strike down an enemy. On the other, he wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, reviewing the decapitated bodies of his foes. This artistic masterpiece isn't just propaganda, it's a statement of divine kingship that would define Egyptian civilization for 3,000 years. The palette reveals sophisticated artistic conventions that would remain virtually unchanged for millennia. Most significantly, it shows the pharaoh wearing both crowns, literally embodying the union of the 2 lands. This represented a new conception of kingship that transcended local loyalties. The pharaoh was no longer just a war leader, but the living embodiment of Egypt itself. Narmer established his capital at Memphis, strategically located at the junction of Upper and Lower Egypt. This city, whose ruins lie near modern Cairo, became the administrative heart of ancient Egypt and remained important throughout the Pharaonic period. The choice of location was brilliant. Memphis could control both the Nile Delta to the north and the river valley to the south. Memphis wasn't just a political center, it was a sacred city. The great temple of Ptah, the creator god, made Memphis a pilgrimage destination for the entire kingdom. The city's workshops produced the finest crafts in Egypt, and its harbor welcomed ships from throughout the ancient world, making it a cosmopolitan center where different cultures mingled. The early dynastic period established many of the fundamental characteristics of Egyptian civilization. The concept of Ma'at, cosmic order, truth, and justice, became central to Egyptian thought. Pharaohs weren't just kings, they were the earthly manifestation of the god Horus, responsible for maintaining Ma'at throughout the kingdom. This divine kingship wasn't just a political tool, it was a genuine religious belief that shaped every aspect of Egyptian society. Ma'at created a system of government unlike any other in the ancient world. The pharaoh wasn't accountable to nobles or assemblies, he was accountable to the gods themselves. This divine mandate gave pharaohs tremendous authority, but it also created enormous pressure to succeed. A pharaoh who failed to maintain Ma'at risked not just political opposition, but cosmic catastrophe. During this period, the Egyptians developed hieroglyphic writing, one of the world's earliest writing systems. Unlike Mesopotamian cuneiform, which was primarily practical, Egyptian hieroglyphs were both functional and sacred. The word hieroglyph itself means sacred carving, and the Egyptians believed that writing had divine power. Scribes held exalted positions in society, and literacy was a pathway to prestige and power. The script combined symbols representing whole words with symbols representing sounds, creating a flexible system capable of recording the full complexity of the Egyptian language. Writing wasn't just about communication, it was about permanence. The Egyptians believed that words had power, that written names and deeds could influence the divine realm. The early pharaohs were buried in elaborate mastaba tombs at Saqqara and Abydos. These rectangular, flat-topped structures were the predecessors of the pyramids and reflected the growing sophistication of Egyptian burial practices. Even in death, the pharaohs maintained their divine status, requiring elaborate provisions for the afterlife. The mastaba tombs weren't just burial chambers, they were complete complexes designed to serve the pharaoh in the afterlife. Underground chambers held the royal mummy and burial goods, while above-ground chapels provided spaces for ongoing worship. The walls were decorated with scenes of daily life, ensuring that the pharaoh would have access to everything needed in the next world. Trade networks expanded dramatically during this period. Egyptian artifacts have been found as far away as the Levant, and foreign goods flowed into Egypt. Cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and gold from Nubia began to appear in Egyptian tombs, indicating an increasingly connected ancient world. This trade wasn't just about luxury goods, it was about raw materials essential to Egyptian civilization. Egypt had abundant stone and grain, but it lacked metal ores and quality timber. The expansion of trade networks also meant the expansion of Egyptian influence, with trading posts becoming administrative centers and military outposts. The early dynastic period established the foundations upon which all subsequent Egyptian civilization would build. The concept of divine kingship, the administrative systems, the artistic traditions, and the religious beliefs developed during these 4 centuries remained remarkably consistent for the next 3 millennia. Most importantly, this period established Egypt's unique relationship with the Nile River. The annual flood wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a divine gift that required careful management. The pharaoh's role as intermediary between the gods and the river would define Egyptian kingship throughout the Pharaonic period. By 2686 BCE, Egypt had evolved from a collection of warring tribes into a unified kingdom with sophisticated government, advanced technology, and monumental architecture. The stage was set for the Old Kingdom, when Egyptian civilization would reach its first great flowering and create monuments that still inspire awe today. The Old Kingdom represents ancient Egypt at its most iconic. This was the age of pyramid building, when pharaohs commanded resources so vast that they could construct monuments that still rank among humanity's greatest architectural achievements. It was during this golden age that Egypt truly became the wonder of the ancient world. The period began with the Third Dynasty and the revolutionary pharaoh Djoser, who ruled around 2670 BCE. Djoser's architect Imhotep created something the world had never seen before: the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Standing 200 feet tall, this six-tiered structure was the first monumental stone building in human history. Imhotep wasn't just an architect, he was a polymath, physician, astronomer, and high priest. So revered was he that later generations worshipped him as a god of medicine and learning. The Step Pyramid transformed the entire concept of royal burial. Previous pharaohs had been buried in low mastaba tombs, but Djoser's pyramid reached toward the heavens, creating a permanent stairway for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the gods. The complex included courtyards for eternal celebrations, underground chambers filled with thousands of stone vessels, and a mortuary temple where priests would maintain the pharaoh's cult forever. But the Step Pyramid was just the beginning. The Fourth Dynasty, beginning around 2613 BCE, would produce the most famous monuments in human history. Pharaoh Sneferu, the first king of this dynasty, was a pyramid-building pioneer who constructed multiple pyramids, experimenting with angles and techniques. His bent pyramid at Dashur shows evidence of mid-construction modifications, revealing the trial-and-error process behind these marvels. Sneferu's obsession with perfection led him to build 3 pyramids. The bent pyramid's distinctive shape resulted from structural problems that forced architects to change the angle mid-construction. Rather than abandon the project, they completed it and immediately began the Red Pyramid, the first true smooth-sided pyramid. Sneferu's son, Khufu, ruled from approximately 2589 to 2566 BCE and achieved immortality by building the Great Pyramid of Giza. This monument, originally standing 481 feet tall, was the tallest human-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. The precision of its construction still amazes engineers today. The base is level to within just 2.1 centimeters, and the sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with incredible accuracy. The Great Pyramid contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. Recent discoveries using cosmic ray imaging have revealed hidden chambers within the pyramid, proving that these monuments still hold secrets after more than 4 millennia. The pyramid complex included smaller pyramids for queens, mastaba tombs for nobles, and a mortuary temple connected by causeway to a valley temple on the Nile's edge. The internal structure is as remarkable as its exterior. The Grand Gallery, a corbelled corridor rising at a 26-degree angle, demonstrates architectural sophistication that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. The King's Chamber, constructed entirely of red granite blocks transported from Aswan 500 miles away, shows the logistical capabilities of the Old Kingdom state. Khufu's successors, Khafre and Menkaure, built their own pyramids at Giza, creating the iconic trio that has captured imaginations for millennia. Khafre also commissioned the Great Sphinx, that enigmatic creature with a human head and lion's body that guards the pyramid complex. The Sphinx, carved from a single piece of limestone, measures 240 feet long and 66 feet high. The Sphinx represents the pharaoh as the sun god, eternally facing east to greet the rising sun. Its leonine body symbolizes royal power, while its human head bears the features of Khafre himself, seamlessly blending human and divine identity. But pyramid building required more than royal ambition. It demanded a sophisticated society capable of mobilizing massive resources. Recent archaeological evidence has revolutionized our understanding of pyramid construction. The workers weren't slaves, as popular culture suggests, but paid laborers who received rations of bread, beer, and onions. Worker villages near the pyramids show evidence of medical care, including healed broken bones, indicating that pyramid builders were valued members of society. The logistics required a complex bureaucracy. quarry workers cut limestone blocks at Giza and transported granite from Aswan. Farmers were mobilized during flood season when agricultural work was impossible. The pyramids weren't just monuments, they were economic engines that employed thousands and distributed wealth throughout Egyptian society. The Old Kingdom also saw the flourishing of Egyptian art and literature. The autobiographical inscriptions in noble tombs provide glimpses into daily life, while pyramid texts, the world's oldest religious writings, offer insights into Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. These texts, first appearing in the Pyramid of Pharaoh Unas around 2375 BCE, contain spells and incantations designed to help the deceased pharaoh navigate the dangers of the underworld. Egyptian art during this period established conventions that would last for centuries. The distinctive Egyptian style, figures shown in profile with eyes facing forward, hierarchical scaling where important figures appear larger, and the use of registers to separate different scenes, all emerged during the Old Kingdom. This wasn't primitive art, it was a sophisticated visual language designed to convey specific meanings and ensure the effectiveness of magical spells. The pharaoh Pepi II, who ruled for an unprecedented 94 years from approximately 2278 to 2184 BCE, saw the beginning of the Old Kingdom's decline. His extremely long reign led to administrative problems as governors in distant provinces grew increasingly independent. Climate change also played a role. A series of low Nile floods caused famines that weakened central authority. The collapse wasn't sudden, but gradual. Provincial governors began building tombs that rivaled royal monuments. The central government's ability to mobilize resources declined. The last pyramids of the Old Kingdom were shabby affairs compared to the monuments of the Fourth Dynasty, built with mud brick cores and limestone facing that quickly crumbled. By 2181 BCE, the unified kingdom that had created the pyramids had fragmented into competing regional powers. The age of pyramid building was over, but its legacy would endure. The monuments of Giza still stand as testament to what human civilization can achieve when vision, resources, and organization combine in pursuit of eternity. The collapse of the Old Kingdom ushered in one of ancient Egypt's darkest periods. The First Intermediate Period was a time of political fragmentation, social upheaval, and cultural crisis that tested the very foundations of Egyptian civilization. Yet, it was also a period of profound transformation that would reshape Egyptian society. Contemporary texts paint a picture of chaos and reversal. The Admonitions of Ipuwer describes a world turned upside down. The poor man has become wealthy, and he who could not make sandals for himself now possesses riches. Servants were giving orders to masters, and the social hierarchy that had defined Egyptian society for centuries seemed to have collapsed. Multiple pharaohs claimed authority simultaneously, with rival dynasties ruling from different cities. Memphis lost its preeminence as regional capitals, like Heracleopolis in Middle Egypt and Thebes in Upper Egypt asserted independence. This political fragmentation was accompanied by economic decline. The great building projects of the Old Kingdom ceased, and artistic quality declined markedly. Archaeological evidence reveals the human cost of this chaos. Cemeteries show signs of mass burials, suggesting warfare or famine. In some areas, people were buried in simple pits rather than proper tombs, indicating the breakdown of traditional burial practices that were so central to Egyptian identity. Yet the First Intermediate Period wasn't entirely destructive. The democratization of previously elite religious practices began during this time. Spells and rituals, once reserved for pharaohs, became available to nobles and eventually to commoners who could afford them. This democratization of the afterlife would become a permanent feature of Egyptian religion. Literature flourished during this period, perhaps because writers had more freedom to express dissent and uncertainty. Works like The Dialogue of a Man with His Soul explored existential themes that would have been unthinkable during the absolute monarchy of the Old Kingdom. The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant used fiction to critique social injustice, while The Prophecy of Neferti looked forward to a time when a strong ruler would restore order. Regional art styles developed during this period, breaking the standardization of Old Kingdom artistic conventions. Local traditions and foreign influences became more prominent, creating a more diverse but less unified cultural landscape. The path to reunification began in Thebes, a previously minor city in Upper Egypt. A series of energetic rulers from the 11th dynasty gradually extended their control northward. Mentuhotep II, who ruled from approximately 2055 to 2004 BCE, finally defeated the northern kingdoms and reunited Egypt under his rule, ending more than a century of division and chaos. The Middle Kingdom represents ancient Egypt's classical age, a time of cultural refinement, territorial expansion, and administrative sophistication that many Egyptians in later periods looked back upon as a golden age. It was during this era that Egyptian literature, art, and philosophy reached new heights of achievement. Mentuhotep II's reunification marked the beginning of Egypt's recovery. But the real architect of Middle Kingdom greatness was Amenemhat I, who founded the 12th dynasty around 1985 BCE. Amenemhat moved the capital to a new city called Itje-Tawi, located south of Memphis, symbolizing the fresh start that the Middle Kingdom represented. This strategic location allowed better control over both Upper and Lower Egypt, while establishing a new administrative center free from the political baggage of previous capitals. The pharaohs of the 12th dynasty were some of Egypt's most capable rulers. Amenemhat I established co-regencies, having his heir rule alongside him for several years before his death. This innovation ensured smooth transitions of power and provided invaluable training for future pharaohs. The practice became a hallmark of Middle Kingdom statecraft, preventing the succession crises that had plagued the First Intermediate Period. Amenemhat's reign also marked a shift in royal ideology. Unlike Old Kingdom pharaohs who had been viewed as living gods, Middle Kingdom rulers presented themselves as shepherds of their people, responsible for Egypt's welfare and prosperity. This change reflected lessons learned from the chaos of the First Intermediate Period, when divine kingship had failed to prevent political collapse. Senusret I, who ruled from approximately 1971 to 1926 BCE, was a great builder and military leader who extended Egyptian influence into Nubia and established a string of fortresses along the Nile's Second Cataract. These massive mud brick fortifications, some covering over 30 acres, were marvels of military engineering that controlled trade routes and protected Egypt's southern border. The fortresses featured complex defensive systems with multiple walls, towers, and gates designed to withstand prolonged sieges. These Nubian campaigns weren't merely military conquests, but represented Egypt's first systematic imperial expansion. Senusret I established permanent garrisons, appointed Egyptian governors, and imposed tribute systems that would become the model for later New Kingdom imperialism. The wealth flowing from Nubian gold mines funded massive construction projects throughout Egypt, including the reconstruction of the temple at Karnak. But it was Senusret III, ruling from about 1878 to 1839 BCE, who truly transformed the Middle Kingdom. He was ancient Egypt's greatest military pharaoh, conducting multiple campaigns into Nubia and Palestine. His military reforms created Egypt's first professional army with standardized equipment, training, and command structures. Unlike previous Egyptian forces that had relied on conscripted peasants, Senusret III's army included career soldiers who served for extended periods. His administrative changes were equally revolutionary. Senusret III systematically dismantled the power of provincial governors, nomarchs, who had challenged royal authority during the first intermediate period. He abolished hereditary governorships, centralized tax collection, and established direct royal control over local administration. These reforms created the most centralized government in Egyptian history and prevented the regional fragmentation that had previously weakened pharaonic authority. Senusret III was also a great builder, responsible for numerous temples and monuments throughout Egypt. His pyramid at Dashur was one of the last great pyramid projects, though Middle Kingdom pyramids were built with mud brick cores and stone casing, making them less durable than their Old Kingdom predecessors. The pyramid complex included elaborate underground chambers with sophisticated security systems designed to prevent tomb robbing. The Middle Kingdom saw a flowering of Egyptian literature that has never been surpassed. The story of Sinuhe, about an Egyptian official who flees to Palestine after the assassination of Amenemhat, is considered one of the masterpieces of world literature. Its sophisticated narrative structure, character development, and psychological insight rival the best works of any ancient civilization. The story explores themes of exile, identity, and loyalty that resonate across cultures and centuries. Other literary works from this period include The Eloquent Peasant, a complex tale about justice and social responsibility, and The Admonitions of Ipuwer, a prophetic text describing social upheaval. These works demonstrate the Middle Kingdom's intellectual sophistication and concern with moral and philosophical questions that had rarely appeared in earlier Egyptian literature. Religious texts from this period show increasing theological sophistication. The concept of a personal relationship with the gods developed, and individuals began to erect private stelae dedicated to particular deities. The god Amun began his rise to prominence during this period, eventually becoming the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon. Middle Kingdom religious thought emphasized Ma'at, cosmic order, and personal morality in ways that would influence Egyptian spirituality for millennia. Middle Kingdom art achieved a new level of realism and emotional expression. Royal statues from this period show pharaohs with careworn faces and realistic proportions, quite different from the idealized representations of the Old Kingdom. The famous statue of Senusret III in the Metropolitan Museum of Art shows a ruler burdened by the responsibilities of kingship, with deep-set eyes and a mouth turned downward in concern. This artistic realism reflected the Middle Kingdom's more complex understanding of royal authority and human nature. Women achieved unprecedented prominence during the Middle Kingdom. Queen Sobekneferu became Egypt's first definitively female pharaoh around 1806 BCE, ruling in her own right for nearly 4 years. Other royal women held significant power as queen mothers and regents, setting precedents that would be important in later periods. The increased prominence of women in royal circles reflected broader social changes that gave women greater legal and economic rights. The Middle Kingdom also saw major technological and cultural innovations. The Egyptians developed new techniques in jewelry making, creating intricate pieces with granulation and filigree work that rival modern craftsmanship. The mathematical papyrus of Ames, dating to this period, shows that Egyptian mathematicians had developed sophisticated techniques for solving complex problems, including calculations for pyramid construction and land surveying. Trade expanded dramatically during the Middle Kingdom. Egyptian merchants established trading posts throughout the Mediterranean and Red Sea regions. The famous Tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor describes voyages to the mysterious Land of Punt, probably located in modern-day Somalia or Ethiopia, where Egyptians obtained incense, gold, and exotic animals. Archaeological evidence shows Egyptian goods reaching as far as Crete and Mesopotamia, while foreign luxury items appeared in elite Egyptian tombs. However, the Middle Kingdom's greatest achievement may have been the Fayum Oasis development project undertaken by Amenemhat III and his predecessors. This massive hydraulic engineering project transformed a natural depression southwest of Cairo into Egypt's most productive agricultural region. The project required building dikes, canals, and regulatory structures that controlled the flow of Nile water into the oasis, effectively creating Egypt's first major irrigation system. The engineering expertise developed during this project would prove crucial for later imperial expansion and agricultural development. The Middle Kingdom's decline began during the 13th dynasty, when royal authority weakened and the kingdom fragmented once again. Climate change played a role, as reduced Nile floods caused agricultural problems. Political instability followed, setting the stage for foreign invasion and the next great crisis in Egyptian history. The Second Intermediate Period brought Egypt face-to-face with its greatest existential crisis since unification. For the first time in over a millennium, foreign rulers controlled Egyptian territory, challenging the fundamental assumption that Egypt was divinely protected and eternally unified under pharaonic rule. This period would transform Egypt from an inward-looking kingdom into an aggressive imperial power that would dominate the ancient Near East for centuries. The Hyksos invasion wasn't a sudden conquest, but rather a gradual infiltration that took advantage of Egypt's internal weakness. The name Hyksos comes from the Egyptian phrase Hekakasut, meaning rulers of foreign lands. They were primarily Canaanites, who had been settling in the eastern Nile Delta throughout the later Middle Kingdom period. The infiltration began peacefully during the prosperous 12th dynasty, when Egyptian pharaohs recruited foreign workers and soldiers. Archaeological evidence from Tel el-Daba, ancient Avaris, shows a gradual cultural transition, with Canaanite-style houses, pottery, and burial practices appearing alongside Egyptian ones. As the Middle Kingdom weakened during the 13th dynasty, central authority collapsed and Egypt fragmented into numerous petty kingdoms. In this power vacuum, the well-organized Hyksos communities consolidated control over the fertile Delta region. By around 1650 BCE, Hyksos rulers had established themselves as pharaohs, founding the 15th dynasty with their capital at Avaris. The Hyksos' success stemmed from military innovations that gave them decisive advantages. They introduced horse-drawn chariots to Egypt, revolutionizing warfare in a land that had previously relied on infantry and river transport. These mobile weapons platforms allowed rapid deployment of archers and provided psychological advantages through their speed and imposing presence. Equally important were their advanced bronze-working techniques and composite bow technology. Hyksos composite bows, made from horn, wood, and sinew, could penetrate armor at ranges that traditional Egyptian weapons couldn't match, giving Hyksos warriors significant advantages in close combat. Contrary to later Egyptian propaganda that portrayed them as destroyers, the Hyksos created a sophisticated and cosmopolitan kingdom. Avaris, their capital, became one of the ancient world's most international cities, with Minoan-style frescoes, Mesopotamian cylinder seals, Cypriot pottery, and artifacts from across the eastern Mediterranean. The Hyksos adopted Egyptian royal titles and religious practices while maintaining their own cultural traditions. They worshipped the Egyptian god Set, identifying him with their own storm god, but also maintained temples to Canaanite deities like Baal and Astarte. Hyksos trade networks extended far beyond Egypt's traditional sphere of influence. With connections to Crete, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, they established Egypt's first truly international diplomatic relationships, corresponding with rulers across the ancient Near East. The famous Minoan frescoes at Avaris likely represent diplomatic gifts between the Hyksos court and Minoan Crete. The Hyksos also introduced new technologies, including improved pottery wheels, vertical looms, and advanced metallurgical techniques. Their mathematical and astronomical knowledge influenced Egyptian scholars. Politically, Hyksos rule was more decentralized than traditional Egyptian pharaonic administration, governing through a network of vassal rulers and city-states that would later influence New Kingdom imperial administration. While the Hyksos controlled northern Egypt, native Egyptian dynasties maintained precarious independence in the south. The 17th dynasty, ruling from Thebes, controlled Upper Egypt from approximately the First Cataract to Kusay in Middle Egypt. These pharaohs faced pressure not only from the Hyksos to the north, but also from the Kingdom of Kush, which had expanded into Lower Nubia during Egypt's period of weakness. The Theban pharaohs found themselves caught between two foreign powers in what Kamose would later describe as sitting between an Asiatic and a Nubian, each man in possession of his slice of Egypt. This geographic squeeze forced the Thebans to develop new military and diplomatic strategies that would eventually enable their victory. The earliest Theban resistance efforts were led by Pharaoh Intef VII, who attempted to extend Theban control northward but achieved limited success. His successors, Ta-a-I and Ta-a-II, also called Seqenenre, continued building Theban military capabilities while carefully studying Hyksos military techniques. Seqenenre Ta'a's mummy, discovered in the royal cache at Deir el-Bahari, tells a dramatic story of violent death. His skull shows evidence of multiple wounds from Hyksos-style axes and daggers, suggesting he died in battle against the foreign rulers. The careful mummification of his badly damaged body indicates that his forces recovered it from the battlefield. The decisive phase of Egyptian liberation began under Kamose, the last pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, around 1555 BCE. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused on defensive warfare, Kamose launched aggressive campaigns aimed at completely expelling the Hyksos from Egypt, seeking to capture their capital and destroy their power base entirely. Kamose systematically captured Hyksos strongholds in Middle Egypt and eliminated their administrative structure. The Carnarvon tablet preserves Kamose's own account of these campaigns. His strategy revealed sophisticated understanding of both military tactics and psychological warfare, deliberately targeting Hyksos administrative centers and trade routes while conducting naval operations on the Nile to outflank enemy defenses. Kamose also intercepted Hyksos diplomatic correspondence, revealing their attempts to coordinate with the Kushite kingdom to the south. However, Kamose's campaigns ended abruptly with his death around 1550 BCE, his mummy showing evidence of violent wounds similar to those found on his predecessor Seqenenre. Ahmose I, who succeeded Kamose as pharaoh around 1550 BCE, completed the liberation of Egypt and founded the 18th dynasty. Only about 10 years old when he became pharaoh, Ahmose initially ruled under the regency of his mother, Queen Ahotep, who played a crucial role in maintaining Theban resistance during the transition period. When Ahmose reached maturity, he launched the final campaigns against the Hyksos with unprecedented resources and determination. Unlike previous efforts that had focused on territorial gains, Ahmose's strategy aimed at the complete destruction of Hyksos power. He understood that merely pushing the foreign rulers out of Egypt wouldn't prevent their return. The Siege of Avaris, the Hyksos capital, represented the climax of the liberation wars. Archaeological evidence suggests this was a prolonged and devastating conflict that left the city in ruins. After capturing Avaris, Ahmose pursued the Hyksos into Palestine, besieging the fortress of Sharuhen for 3 years. This extended campaign demonstrated the new Egyptian approach to warfare. Rather than simply defending their borders, they would eliminate threats at their source. The successful expulsion of the Hyksos transformed Egypt in fundamental ways that would shape its development for the next 5 centuries. The experience of foreign rule had shattered traditional assumptions about Egypt's natural security, forcing Egyptian leaders to develop new approaches to defense and statecraft. Most importantly, the liberation wars created Egypt's first professional military. The Theban pharaohs had developed standing armies, professional officer corps, and advanced military technologies to defeat the Hyksos. These military innovations became permanent features of Egyptian society that enabled imperial expansion. The psychological impact of foreign rule was equally significant. Later, Egyptian texts describe the Hyksos period as a time of chaos and humiliation that must never be repeated. This national trauma created a siege mentality that drove Egyptian imperialism for centuries. Rather than returning to passive defense, Egyptian pharaohs concluded that security required controlling the approaches to Egypt, which meant conquering Palestine, Syria, and Nubia. The Hyksos period also exposed Egypt to international influences that would prove crucial for imperial success. Egyptian exposure to foreign languages, diplomatic practices, and military technologies prepared them for the complex international relations that would characterize the Late Bronze Age. The Liberation Wars established the pharaoh as military leader in ways that hadn't existed during the Old and Middle Kingdoms. Previous pharaohs had been primarily religious and administrative figures. Ahmose and his successors were warrior kings who personally led armies and based their legitimacy on military success. The victory over the Hyksos also elevated Thebes from a provincial city to Egypt's most important religious center. The god Amun, patron deity of Thebes, became associated with military victory and would eventually emerge as king of the gods during the New Kingdom. Finally, the liberation established precedents for Egyptian treatment of foreign peoples that would influence imperial administration for centuries. Unlike the Hyksos, who had attempted to rule through accommodation and cultural synthesis, the New Kingdom Egyptians would impose their authority through military force while extracting tribute and resources to prevent any future challenges to Egyptian dominance. Ahmose's victory marked more than just the end of foreign rule. It initiated the New Kingdom, ancient Egypt's imperial age. The trauma of foreign domination had taught the Egyptians that passive defense wasn't enough. To prevent future invasions, Egypt would need to control the approaches to the Nile Valley, which meant building an empire that would make Egypt the dominant power in the ancient Near East for over 4 centuries. The New Kingdom transformed Egypt from a regional power into the ancient world's first global empire. For over 400 years, Egyptian armies marched from the Fourth Cataract of the Nile in Sudan to the Euphrates River in Syria, while Egyptian gold, diplomacy, and cultural influence shaped the entire ancient Near East. This transformation didn't happen overnight. The early pharaohs of the 18th dynasty had to rebuild Egypt's military from the ground up, learning from their Hyksos conquerors while adapting new technologies and tactics. The horse-drawn chariot, bronze weapons, and composite bows became the foundation of Egyptian military power. But it was Egyptian organizational genius that turned these tools into instruments of empire. Ahmose I's successors, the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, were some of history's greatest conquerors. Thutmose I, ruling from approximately 1504 to 1492 BCE, was the first pharaoh to cross the Euphrates River, establishing Egyptian power in the heart of Mesopotamia. His campaigns into Nubia extended Egyptian control to the Fourth Cataract, securing the gold mines that would finance Egypt's imperial ambitions. Thutmose I's military campaigns were marked by unprecedented boldness. When he crossed the Euphrates, he erected a victory stele declaring himself King of Kings, a title that would echo through ancient Near Eastern history. His Nubian campaigns weren't mere raids, but systematic conquests that established permanent Egyptian garrisons and administrative centers. The fortress of Sai Island became the hub of Egyptian colonial administration in Nubia, complete with Egyptian temples, workshops, and schools that spread Egyptian culture deep into Africa. But it was Thutmose III, the Napoleon of ancient Egypt, who created the fully formed Egyptian empire. During his 54-year reign, 1479 to 1425 BCE, he conducted 17 military campaigns, winning decisive victories at Megiddo, Kadesh, and dozens of other battles. His military genius lay not just in battlefield tactics, but in strategic thinking. He understood that empire required more than conquest. It demanded administration, diplomacy, and cultural integration. The Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BCE exemplifies Thutmose III's military brilliance. Facing a coalition of Canaanite kings, he chose the most dangerous but unexpected route through the Aruna Pass, achieving complete tactical surprise. The battle lasted just hours, but the siege of Megiddo took 7 months. Thutmose's patient strategy secured not just victory, but lasting control over Palestine. What made Thutmose III truly exceptional was his understanding of psychological warfare. At Megiddo, he didn't just defeat his enemies, he captured their weapons, chariots, and royal regalia, displaying them in Egypt as symbols of pharaonic power. He took hostages from royal families, but rather than executing them, he educated them in Egyptian courts, creating a generation of local rulers who understood and respected Egyptian power. Thutmose III's empire stretched from Kurgas in Sudan to Carchemish in Syria, encompassing modern-day Egypt, Sudan, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and parts of Syria and Jordan. This wasn't just territorial control, it was a sophisticated system of client states, tribute collection, and cultural exchange that influenced the entire ancient world. The wealth flowing into Egypt during the New Kingdom was staggering. Tribute lists from Karnak Temple record gold, silver, ivory, exotic woods, precious stones, horses, cattle, and slaves pouring into Egypt from conquered territories. This wealth funded massive building projects, supported a professional military, and allowed Egyptian culture to reach unprecedented heights of sophistication. The economic impact of empire transformed Egyptian society. Thebes became one of the ancient world's wealthiest cities, its temples repositories of international treasure. The priesthood of Amun grew so powerful that they rivaled the pharaohs themselves. Military commanders returned from campaigns with enough wealth to build private tombs that rivaled royal monuments. Even ordinary soldiers and administrators could afford luxuries that previous generations could never have imagined. This wealth also funded technological innovation. Egyptian metalworkers mastered new techniques for working gold, silver, and bronze. Egyptian shipbuilders created vessels capable of sailing the Red Sea and Mediterranean. Egyptian engineers developed new methods for quarrying, transporting, and raising massive stone blocks, techniques that would make possible the great temples and monuments of the New Kingdom. Religious revolution marked another aspect of New Kingdom innovation. Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten, ruled from approximately 1353 to 1336 BCE and attempted to replace Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion with monotheistic worship of the sun disk, Aten. This wasn't just religious reform, it was a complete restructuring of Egyptian society, art, and culture. Akhenaten's revolution was driven by both religious conviction and political calculation. The priesthood of Amun had grown so wealthy and powerful that they threatened royal authority. By promoting Aten worship, Akhenaten sought to bypass the traditional religious hierarchy and establish himself as the sole intermediary between the divine and human worlds. Akhenaten moved the capital to a new city called Akhetaten, modern Amarna, and commissioned art that broke radically with Egyptian traditions. Amarna period art showed the royal family in intimate, naturalistic scenes quite different from the formal, stylized representations of traditional Egyptian art. The famous bust of his queen, Nefertiti, exemplifies this new artistic style with its realistic proportions and emotional expressiveness. The art of the Amarna period reveals a royal family unlike any other in Egyptian history. Akhenaten and Nefertiti are shown playing with their daughters, kissing in public, and displaying physical affection that would have been scandalous in traditional Egyptian royal imagery. This wasn't merely artistic innovation, it was a complete reimagining of pharaonic dignity and divine kingship. However, Akhenaten's revolution was short-lived. His successor, the boy Pharaoh Tutankhamun, restored traditional religious practices and moved the capital back to Memphis. Tutankhamun's intact tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, provides an unparalleled glimpse into New Kingdom royal burial practices and artistic achievement. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb revealed not just incredible treasures, but also the restoration of traditional Egyptian values. The young pharaoh's burial goods included traditional Egyptian religious texts, images of the old gods, and artistic styles that deliberately rejected Amarna period innovations. His famous golden mask, with its serene expression and traditional Egyptian artistic conventions, symbolized Egypt's return to its ancient roots. Yet Tutankhamun's tomb also demonstrated the continuing influence of empire. Among his burial goods were objects from throughout the Egyptian empire and beyond. Ivory from Africa, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia. Even in death, the pharaoh was surrounded by the wealth of the ancient world. The 19th dynasty, beginning around 1295 BCE, marked the height of Egyptian imperial power. Seti I and his son Ramesses II were great builders and warriors who restored Egyptian control over territories lost during the Amarna period. Ramesses II, who ruled for 67 years from 1279 to 1213 BCE, was ancient Egypt's greatest pharaoh in terms of monuments, military campaigns, and historical impact. Ramesses II understood that monuments were weapons of imperial control. His building projects weren't merely displays of wealth, they were carefully calculated demonstrations of Egyptian power designed to overawe subjects and intimidate enemies. Every temple, every statue, every inscription proclaimed the same message. Egypt was eternal, Egypt was invincible, and resistance was futile. Ramesses II's building projects were unprecedented in scale. His additions to Karnak Temple, his mortuary temple, the Ramesseum, and especially the twin temples at Abu Simbel represent the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian architecture. The Abu Simbel temples, carved directly into cliff faces and featuring colossal statues of the pharaoh, were designed to overawe Egypt's Nubian subjects and demonstrate pharaonic power to all who sailed past. The Abu Simbel temples were masterpieces of both engineering and propaganda. The larger temple was aligned so that twice yearly, on Ramesses II's birthday and coronation day, the rising sun would illuminate the pharaoh's statue in the temple's innermost sanctuary. This wasn't coincidence. It was a deliberate demonstration that the pharaoh was chosen by the sun god Ra himself. Outside of his great build, Ramesses II's military might was showcased in the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE and was his most famous military campaign. Fighting against the Hittite Empire for control of Syria, Ramesses found himself trapped by enemy forces, but managed to fight his way to safety. Though the battle was essentially a draw, Ramesses claimed complete victory and had the story carved on temple walls throughout Egypt. The Battle of Kadesh revealed both the strengths and limitations of Egyptian military power. Ramesses II's personal courage and tactical skill prevented a disaster, but the campaign also demonstrated that Egypt could no longer simply impose its will on the ancient Near East. The Hittite Empire was an equal match for Egyptian power, and future conflicts would require diplomacy as much as warfare. More importantly, the aftermath of Kadesh led to the world's first recorded peace treaty. The Egyptian-Hittite peace treaty of 1259 BCE established principles of international diplomacy that remain relevant today: mutual defense, extradition of fugitives, and peaceful resolution of disputes. Clay tablets containing the treaty text have been found in both Egyptian and Hittite archives, demonstrating the sophisticated diplomatic machinery of the ancient world. The New Kingdom also saw the flowering of Egyptian literature and learning. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to this period, is the world's oldest surgical text, describing procedures for treating head and spinal injuries with remarkable medical sophistication. The mathematical and astronomical papyri from this period show that Egyptian scholars had developed advanced techniques for calculating areas, volumes, and celestial movements. Egyptian medicine during the New Kingdom combined empirical observation with magical thinking in ways that often produced effective treatments. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes surgical procedures that wouldn't be out of place in a modern medical textbook, including detailed observations of brain function and spinal cord injuries. Egyptian physicians understood that the brain controlled bodily functions, an insight that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. Egyptian influence during the New Kingdom extended far beyond military conquest. Egyptian artistic styles, architectural techniques, and religious concepts spread throughout the ancient Near East. The Amarna letters, diplomatic correspondence found at Akhenaten's capital, reveal that rulers from Babylon to Cyprus communicated in Egyptian-influenced diplomatic conventions and sought Egyptian princesses for their harems. The Amarna letters provide a fascinating glimpse into ancient international relations. Kings addressed the pharaoh as brother, engaged in elaborate gift exchanges, and complained when their presents weren't deemed sufficiently valuable. These diplomatic archives reveal a world where Egyptian gold, Egyptian princesses, and Egyptian prestige were the currency of international politics. During this time, women achieved remarkable prominence during the New Kingdom. Queen Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh for 22 years, 1479 to 1458 BCE, commissioning building projects that rivaled those of any male pharaoh. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of ancient Egypt's architectural masterpieces, demonstrating that female pharaohs could equal male rulers in ambition and achievement. Hatshepsut's reign challenged traditional Egyptian concepts of kingship. She wore the false beard of kingship, took traditional royal titles, and commissioned art that showed her performing the ritual duties of pharaoh. Her mortuary temple was designed to demonstrate the divine kingship transcended gender, that a woman could be as effective a ruler as any man. But Hatshepsut was not the only powerful woman of the New Kingdom. Queen Nefertiti may have ruled as pharaoh after Akhenaten's death. Queen Nefertari, Ramesses II's beloved wife, was honored with her own magnificently decorated tomb in the Valley of the Queens. These women weren't merely royal consorts, they were active participants in Egyptian imperial politics. The New Kingdom represented the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian civilization. For over 4 centuries, Egypt dominated the ancient world through military might, diplomatic skill, cultural influence, and economic power. The pharaohs of this period created monuments that still inspire awe today, established diplomatic practices that influenced international relations for millennia, and spread Egyptian culture throughout the ancient Near East and Africa. Yet, the New Kingdom also contained the seeds of its own decline. The vast wealth required to maintain the empire, the growing power of the priesthood, and the constant military campaigns gradually weakened Egypt's internal unity. Foreign mercenaries became increasingly important in Egyptian armies, while native Egyptian soldiers were drawn away from productive labor to serve in distant campaigns. The empire's cultural influence was so profound that it outlasted Egyptian political control. Long after Egyptian armies had withdrawn from Syria and Palestine, local rulers continued to use Egyptian titles, commission Egyptian-style art, and follow Egyptian administrative practices. The New Kingdom had created not just a political empire, but a cultural one that would influence the ancient world for centuries to come. The New Kingdom's collapse around 1077 BCE marked the beginning of ancient Egypt's long decline. The next 7 centuries would see foreign invasions, internal chaos, brief revivals, and ultimately the end of native pharaonic rule. Yet even in decline, Egypt remained a major power whose cultural influence continued to shape the ancient world. Ancient Egypt's demise started during the Third Intermediate Period, 1077 to 664 BCE, began with the fragmentation of the New Kingdom into competing dynasties. High priests of Amun at Thebes claimed royal authority in Upper Egypt, while pharaohs ruling from Tanis controlled the Delta. This division weakened Egypt internally and made it vulnerable to foreign invasion. The fragmentation was more complex than a simple north-south split. Multiple dynasties ruled simultaneously, creating a confusing patchwork of competing claims to legitimacy. The 21st dynasty at Tanis struggled to maintain control over Lower Egypt, while the high priests at Thebes effectively ruled as kings in all but name. Local governors in Middle Egypt often acted independently, further fragmenting royal authority. Trade networks that had sustained Egyptian prosperity for millennia began to break down. The collapse of the Hittite Empire and invasions by the mysterious Sea Peoples had disrupted Mediterranean commerce, while Nubian gold mines fell under independent control. Without these traditional sources of wealth, the competing Egyptian dynasties lacked resources to maintain effective armies or grand building projects. The most dramatic challenge came from the south. Nubian kings, who had adopted Egyptian culture during centuries of imperial control, conquered Egypt in the 8th century BCE and established the 25th dynasty. These black pharaohs, Paye, Shabako, Shabitku, and Taharka, ruled both Egypt and Sudan from their capital at Napata, creating the largest African empire in ancient history. Ironically, the Nubian pharaohs were more traditionally Egyptian than many native rulers. They restored ancient religious practices, commissioned temple-building projects, and even revived pyramid building in Sudan. The Nubians saw themselves as the true guardians of Egyptian civilization, rescuing it from the decadence and division of the late dynasties. Piye's conquest stela, discovered at Gebel Barkal, reveals the religious fervor that motivated Nubian expansion. The inscription describes how Piye was commanded by Amun to restore proper worship and unite the two lands under righteous rule. This wasn't merely political conquest, but a holy war to restore Egyptian civilization to its former glory. Taharka, the greatest of the Nubian pharaohs, ruled from 690 to 664 BCE and left monuments from Kawa in Sudan to Memphis in Egypt. His reign represented the high point of Nubian power, with building projects rivaling those of the New Kingdom. The temple at Kawa, with its forest of columns and elaborate reliefs, demonstrated that Nubian Egypt could still create architectural marvels. Despite their power, the Nubians faced a threat they couldn't overcome: the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrians, masters of iron weapons and siege warfare, represented a new kind of military power that traditional Egyptian tactics couldn't match. Assyrian kings Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal invaded Egypt repeatedly between 671 and 663 BCE, ultimately driving the Nubians south and establishing Assyrian control over Egypt. The Assyrian invasions were devastating in their systematic brutality. Cities were sacked, temples plundered, and populations deported. For the first time since the Hyksos period, Egypt was ruled by a foreign empire based outside Africa. The shock of Assyrian conquest shattered Egyptian confidence in their god's protection and their civilization's superiority. Assyrian rule was brief but transformative. The Assyrians governed through Egyptian vassals, particularly Psamtik I of Sais, who gradually consolidated power and eventually drove out the Assyrian garrisons around 656 BCE. This began the Sate period, 664 to 525 BCE, ancient Egypt's last great revival under native rule. The Sate pharaohs consciously modeled themselves on Old Kingdom precedents, commissioning art and architecture that deliberately recalled Egypt's classical age. This Sate Renaissance wasn't mere nostalgia, it was a sophisticated attempt to restore Egyptian identity and independence through cultural revival. Psamtik Saron's unification of Egypt after decades of division was a remarkable achievement. He carefully balanced competing interests, appointing his daughter as God's wife of Amun at Thebes to secure southern loyalty, while maintaining his capital at Sais in the north. His long reign of 54 years provided the stability Egypt desperately needed. The Sate pharaohs re-established Egyptian control over Nubia, rebuilt the Egyptian navy, and hired Greek mercenaries to modernize the military. They also opened Egypt to foreign trade and settlement, establishing Greek colonies at Naucratis in the Delta and employing Phoenician, Jewish, and other foreign specialists. This cosmopolitan approach revitalized the Egyptian economy while maintaining cultural distinctiveness. The Sate period produced some of ancient Egypt's finest art and literature. The so-called Sate style achieved remarkable technical perfection, combining classical Egyptian motifs with subtle innovations. Sculptors created portraits of unprecedented psychological depth, while architects designed temples that rivaled Old Kingdom monuments in their grandeur. Literary works, like the Demotic Chronicle, showed sophisticated historical consciousness, analyzing Egypt's past to understand its present challenges. Egyptian priests during this period also compiled many of the religious texts that would later influence Greek philosophy and early Christianity. The Sate period represented not just political revival, but intellectual renaissance. However, the Sate revival couldn't survive the rise of the Persian Empire. In 525 BCE, the Persian king Cambyses II conquered Egypt at the Battle of Pelusium, incorporating it into the vast Achaemenid Empire as a satrapy. According to Herodotus, Cambyses used the Egyptians' reverence for animals against them, placing sacred cats and other creatures in front of his advancing troops to prevent Egyptian resistance. The First Persian period, 525 to 404 BCE, marked the end of independent pharaonic rule, though Persian kings adopted pharaonic titles and maintained Egyptian religious practices. Darius I, the greatest of the Persian pharaohs, completed the canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea and commissioned Egyptian temples, showing respect for local traditions while extracting Egypt's wealth for imperial projects. Persian rule was generally tolerant but exploitative. Egypt's grain fed Persian armies, its gold filled Persian treasuries, and its soldiers served in campaigns from India to Greece. Nevertheless, Egyptian culture remained vibrant, and several unsuccessful revolts demonstrated that the desire for independence burned strong. A successful revolt in 404 BCE established the 28th dynasty and began Egypt's last period of independence. 404 to 343 BCE, the pharaohs of the 29th and 30th dynasties fought desperately to maintain independence, forming alliances with Greek city-states and hiring Greek mercenaries to resist Persian reconquest. Nectanebo I and Nectanebo II, the last great native pharaohs, were capable rulers who built extensively and maintained Egyptian independence for over 60 years. Nectanebo I's temple at Philae and Nectanebo II's additions to Karnak showed that Egyptian civilization retained its creative power even under constant military pressure. However, they faced an impossible task. The Persian Empire's resources vastly exceeded Egypt's, and repeated invasions gradually weakened Egyptian resistance. The death of Nectanebo II's Greek allies in their own struggles with Philip II of Macedon left Egypt isolated and vulnerable. In 343 BCE, the Persian king Artaxerxes III reconquered Egypt, beginning the Second Persian period, 343 to 332 BCE. This second occupation was harsher than the first, with Persian governors showing little respect for Egyptian traditions. Temples were looted, priests persecuted, and traditional festivals banned. Yet Persian rule was brief. Storm clouds were gathering in the west, where a young Macedonian prince named Alexander was forging the greatest military machine the ancient world had ever seen. In 336 BCE, Alexander became king of Macedon. 6 years later, he would stand on Egyptian soil as pharaoh, bringing 3 millennia of native rule to an end, while opening a new chapter in Egypt's remarkable story. The Persian garrison at Pelusium fell without serious resistance. The fortress at Memphis surrendered after a brief siege. By November 332 BCE, Alexander had been crowned pharaoh in the ancient capital, and Egypt entered its final phase as an independent power under foreign rule, the brilliant, complex, and ultimately tragic Ptolemaic period that would bridge the ancient and classical worlds. Alexander's conquest of Egypt in 332 BCE was surprisingly peaceful. The Egyptians, who had chafed under Persian rule, welcomed the young Macedonian king as a liberator. Alexander's visit to the Oracle of Amun at Siwa Oasis, where he was proclaimed son of the god, established his legitimacy as pharaoh and created a precedent for the divine kingship that would characterize Ptolemaic rule. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his general Ptolemy claimed Egypt as his share of the divided empire. Ptolemy warned Soter established the Ptolemaic dynasty, which would rule Egypt for nearly 3 centuries until the Roman conquest in 30 BCE. The Ptolemies created a unique hybrid civilization that combined Egyptian, Greek, and Near Eastern elements into something entirely new. The Ptolemies established their capital at Alexandria, the city Alexander had founded in the Nile Delta. Alexandria quickly became the largest city in the ancient world, with a population exceeding 400,000 at its peak. More importantly, it became the intellectual center of the Hellenistic world, home to the famous library and museum that attracted scholars from across the known world. The Library of Alexandria was more than just a collection of books. It was history's first research institution. Scholars like Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes conducted groundbreaking work in mathematics, physics, and geography. Eratosthenes famously calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy, while Aristarchus proposed that the Earth orbited the Sun nearly 2,000 years before Copernicus. The Ptolemies were sophisticated rulers who understood that governing Egypt required respecting Egyptian traditions while maintaining their Greek identity. They adopted pharaonic titles and married their sisters in traditional Egyptian royal fashion, but they spoke Greek and patronized Greek culture. This cultural dualism created tensions that would eventually contribute to their downfall. Ptolemaic Egypt was incredibly wealthy, controlling Mediterranean trade routes and possessing the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world. The Ptolemies established a planned economy with state monopolies on key industries like oil production, textiles, and banking. This system generated enormous revenues that funded military campaigns, building projects, and cultural patronage. The early Ptolemies were capable rulers who expanded Egyptian territory and influence. Ptolemy II Philadelphus, 285 to 246 BCE, controlled territories from Cyrenaica to southern Syria, while Ptolemy III Euergetes, 246 to 221 BCE, briefly conquered the Seleucid capital at Antioch. However, territorial expansion brought Egypt into conflict with other Hellenistic kingdoms, leading to a series of Syrian wars that gradually exhausted Egyptian resources. The most famous Ptolemaic ruler was Cleopatra VII, who ruled from 51 to 30 BCE. Contrary to popular myth, Cleopatra was highly educated, speaking 9 languages and personally conducting diplomatic negotiations with Rome. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony were political alliances designed to preserve Egyptian independence in the face of Roman expansion. Cleopatra's Egypt was still formidable. The country remained wealthy, and Alexandria continued to be a center of learning and culture. However, Egypt faced an impossible challenge in the form of Roman expansion. Rome's vast resources and military superiority made Egyptian independence ultimately unsustainable. Rome's involvement in Egyptian affairs began long before the final conquest. During the 2nd century BCE, weak Ptolemaic rulers had increasingly relied on Roman support to maintain their thrones. Ptolemy VIII, Euergetes II, had fled to Rome during a civil war in 164 BCE, while later rulers frequently sought Roman arbitration in dynastic disputes. This pattern of dependence gradually eroded Egyptian sovereignty and gave Rome increasing influence over Egyptian policy. The relationship became critical when Ptolemy XII Auletes was expelled by Alexandrian riots in 58 BCE. He traveled to Rome seeking support from Pompey the Great, who arranged for his restoration with Roman military backing. The cost was enormous. Ptolemy XII mortgaged Egypt's future revenues to Roman moneylenders and was forced to accept a Roman garrison in Alexandria. From this point forward, Egypt existed as a client state rather than an independent kingdom. Cleopatra VII inherited this impossible situation when she became co-ruler with her younger brother Ptolemy XIII in 51 BCE. The siblings' rivalry provided Julius Caesar with the perfect opportunity to intervene directly in Egyptian affairs. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE pursuing his rival Pompey, he found himself embroiled in the Ptolemaic civil war. His decision to support Cleopatra against her brother was both personal and strategic. Egypt's wealth was crucial for financing his own ambitions. The Alexandrian War of 47 BCE demonstrated both Egypt's continued military capabilities and its ultimate vulnerability to Roman power. Ptolemy XIII's forces, supported by the Alexandrian mob, besieged Caesar and Cleopatra in the royal palace for months. Only the arrival of Roman reinforcements from Syria allowed Caesar to defeat the Egyptian army and secure Cleopatra's throne. The war devastated Alexandria and symbolically marked the end of Ptolemaic independence. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra produced a son, Caesarion, whom she claimed as Caesar's heir. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Cleopatra aligned herself with Mark Antony, recognizing that Roman protection was essential for her kingdom's survival. Their relationship wasn't merely romantic, it was a sophisticated attempt to create a new power block that could rival Octavian's growing dominance in the Western Mediterranean. Antony and Cleopatra's alliance represented the last realistic chance for Egyptian independence. Their combined resources were formidable. Egypt's wealth, Antony's legions, and naval forces from across the eastern Mediterranean. They controlled territories from Armenia to Cyrenaica and commanded loyalty from numerous client kings. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that they might establish a rival empire based in Alexandria. However, Augustus Octavian proved a masterful propagandist who portrayed the conflict not as a Roman civil war, but as a struggle between Roman virtue and Eastern decadence. He convinced the Roman Senate that Antony had gone native and abandoned Roman values for Egyptian luxury. The propaganda campaign was so effective that many of Antony's supporters abandoned him before the decisive confrontation. The Battle of Actium on September 2nd, 31 BCE, was more a strategic withdrawal than a crushing defeat. Cleopatra and Antony broke through Octavian's naval blockade with a substantial portion of their fleet intact, but they had lost the initiative. More critically, Antony's land forces defected to Octavian, leaving the couple without the military resources needed to continue resistance. The final act played out in Alexandria during the summer of 30 BCE. Octavian's forces advanced across the eastern Mediterranean, accepting the surrender of former Antony supporters while systematically isolating Egypt. When Octavian reached Alexandria's outskirts, further resistance became impossible. Antony's own life-taking attempt failed initially, and he died in Cleopatra's arms after being mortally wounded falling on his sword. Cleopatra's final days demonstrated her intelligence and dignity even in defeat. She attempted to negotiate with Octavian, possibly hoping to preserve some form of Ptolemaic rule under Roman suzerainty. When it became clear that Octavian intended to parade her through Rome as a captive, she chose death over humiliation. Her taking of her own life by snakebite on August 12, 30 BCE, ended both her life and the Ptolemaic dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries, leaving Egypt to become a Roman province, though its cultural influence would continue to shape the Mediterranean world for centuries to come. Ancient Egypt's political independence may have ended with Cleopatra's death, but its cultural influence was just beginning to spread across the known world. Roman emperors adopted pharaonic titles when ruling Egypt, and Egyptian religious concepts, particularly ideas about death and resurrection, would profoundly influence early Christianity. The goddess Isis became one of the most popular deities in the Roman Empire, while Egyptian architectural styles influenced Roman builders from Britain to Mesopotamia. The Islamic conquest of Egypt in 641 CE marked another transformation, but even Islamic rulers recognized Egypt's special status. Medieval Arab historians preserved Egyptian historical traditions, while Islamic architects incorporated pharaonic motifs into their buildings. The great Islamic scholar al-Makrizi wrote detailed accounts of ancient Egyptian monuments, helping preserve knowledge that would otherwise have been lost. The European rediscovery of ancient Egypt began with Napoleon's expedition in 1798, which included not just soldiers but scholars who systematically studied Egyptian antiquities. The Rosetta Stone, discovered during this expedition, provided the key to deciphering hieroglyphic writing. Jean-François Champollion's breakthrough in 1822 opened ancient Egyptian literature to modern readers for the first time in over a millennium. The 19th and 20th centuries saw an explosion of Egyptological research that revolutionized our understanding of ancient Egypt. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 captured global imagination, while ongoing archaeological work continues to reveal new aspects of Egyptian civilization. Recent discoveries include evidence of previously unknown pharaohs, new tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and revolutionary insights into pyramid construction techniques. Modern Egypt continues to grapple with its pharaonic legacy. The ancient monuments are major tourist attractions that provide crucial revenue, but they also require enormous resources for conservation and protection. Climate change, urban development, and mass tourism pose serious threats to sites that have survived for millennia. Yet ancient Egypt's greatest legacy isn't found in monuments or museums. It's found in the ideas and innovations that became fundamental to human civilization. The concept of centralized government, the use of written contracts and legal codes, the development of medicine and mathematics, the creation of monumental architecture, and the belief in individual dignity and worth all trace their origins to the banks of the Nile. Egyptian religious concepts profoundly influenced later civilizations. The idea of judgment after death, where individuals are held accountable for their actions, appears first in Egyptian texts like the Negative Confession from the Book of the Dead. The concept of a savior god who dies and is reborn, embodied in the myth of Osiris, would later influence mystery religions throughout the Mediterranean world and contribute to early Christian theology. Egyptian art established aesthetic principles that continue to influence artists today. The pursuit of ideal beauty, the use of artistic conventions to convey meaning beyond mere representation, and the integration of art with architecture all began in ancient Egypt. Modern artists, from Picasso to contemporary designers, continue to draw inspiration from Egyptian artistic traditions. That enduring artistic influence is just one part of ancient Egypt's remarkable legacy. Its ideas, aesthetics, and innovations continue to shape the modern world, not just in galleries or architecture, but in how we think about civilization itself. Egypt showed what human beings can accomplish through unity, organization, and shared vision. The pyramids, built with Bronze Age tools and coordinated labor, stand not only as engineering marvels, but as symbols of what collective human effort can achieve. At the core of this civilization was Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order, truth, and justice. It guided every aspect of Egyptian life, embedding the belief that leadership is a responsibility, that justice matters, and that a society functions best when its people act in harmony. These values still echo through modern institutions and ethical systems, but Egypt's story also carries a warning. As new powers and technologies emerged, Egypt's reluctance to change left it vulnerable. Even the most glorious civilizations must adapt or fade. And yet, Egypt's real gift wasn't just monuments or myths. It was the blueprint for civilization itself. Centralized government, written laws, medical knowledge, mathematics, architecture, and even the idea that life has spiritual meaning all trace back to the Nile. As we face challenges of our own, climate change, inequality, and rapid change, Egypt reminds us of what's possible when we lead with purpose, preserve wisdom, and work together across generations. The Great Pyramid still towers above the desert, a 4,000-year-old symbol of what humans can build when they dream beyond their limits. But Egypt's most lasting monument isn't made of stone. It's the enduring legacy of ideas and inspiration that still guide us. In the end, the story of ancient Egypt is more than just a distant past. It's a reminder of who we are and what we're capable of. Through their triumphs and trials, the ancient Egyptians showed us that greatness is built not only with stone, but with vision, unity, and purpose. As we look to the future, their legacy challenges us to dream boldly, to build wisely, and to leave behind not just monuments, but meaning. This has been the story of ancient Egypt, a civilization that dared to shape eternity, and, in many ways, still does.